If you still got your Bibles open to 1 Kings chapter 11, it's a good place to stay. That's where Josh read from a minute ago. It's the first one that we'll look at together. But first of all, I just want to say it's good to see everybody here. Good to be here with you. If you were here on Wednesday night, you heard the announcement that Danny and family were going to be out of town. He's holding a gospel meeting up in Arkansas. And so here are the consequences of that. I get to be part of Substitute Sunday. And so, always a good opportunity, something to look forward to. I got to admit, I was a little worried, though, when I was coming in this morning. I remembered Yell wasn't going to be here. I thought, who's going to laugh at the jokes? Okay, that was a test, and so thank you. All right, so this morning, what we're going to do, we're spend some time looking at some lessons from the divided kingdom. And so why go back a few months, if you were here in the fall, you might remember we did a class, Corey and I did a class on divided kingdom here in the auditorium. Well, I was on the schedule to preach in November, and I kind of had this lesson kind of thought out, and then I got skipped on the schedule. And so when David came and asked last week if I could fill in this morning, I was like, yes, I've got an idea. So that's half the battle, right? So we're gonna talk about that a little bit, talk about some of the characters and some of the lessons that we can learn from that. Divided kingdom, people that died more than 2,500 years ago, from a very different place, from a very different culture. Why take the time to look at them? Because people are people. And some of the failings, some of the challenges that they had are some of the same ones that we go through today, and we can still learn from them as a result. So, Josh read from you from 1 Kings chapter 11, where the prophet Ahijah went to Jeroboam, told him about what was going to happen. The kingdom of Israel was going to be torn in two. But let's review a little bit back before that, before we get in and kind of jump in here to the study. And I won't go all the way back to like the beginning of the kingdom of Israel, but remember after they come up out of Egypt, God had promised Abraham they were going to have a land, they were going to have a great nation. And so that's when that came true. Joshua led them through to the conquest of the nation of Israel. They settled the land, and for the first 400 years or so, people were ruled by a series of judges. Or maybe ruled is not the right word, led, anyway. But Samuel was the last one. When Samuel was getting old, it seemed like he had some plans for his sons to take over and kind of follow in his footsteps. But his sons were not, let's just say they were not of the character of Samuel. People didn't like that. People said, we want a king. Samuel gave them some advice. And you don't have to turn here. I just want to read, I'm going to select a couple of things from the passage. But in 1 Samuel chapter 8, in verse 10, so Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who are asking for a king from him. He said, these will be the ways of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them to his chariots and to be his horsemen and to run before his chariots. He will appoint for himself commanders of thousands, commanders of 50, some to plow his ground and to reap his harvest, and to make his implements of war and the equipment of his chariots. He goes on to talk about how the king will take the daughters to be bakers and other servants. And he's going to tax them. Basically, the king will be a burden on them that they haven't had to put up with up to this point. But the people didn't listen. The people wanted a king. They said, we want to be like everybody else around us. All the surrounding nations have a king. We want a king. And so they got a king. Saul came in first, and then David, and then Solomon. And under Solomon, that was when the kingdom of Israel really reached the height of its power, the greatest extent of its territory, the peak influence, the peak of their wealth. We know that nobody was ever wealthy like Solomon, but it turns out that supporting that lavish lifestyle and supporting Solomon's large family, and nobody ever had a large family quite like Solomon, right? That took a toll on the kingdom. And so it was almost like Samuel knew what he was talking about. And so it came to be, and this is where we catch up in 1 Kings chapter 12. When Solomon died and his son Rehoboam was getting ready to take the throne, the people came to him with a request. Remember, Jeroboam the prophecy's already gone that he will take over the kingdom. Well, Jeroboam kind of resurfaces here. Let's start reading in 1 Kings chapter 12, right in the first verse. It says, Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all Israel had come to Shechem to make him king. And as soon as Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, heard of it, for he was still in Egypt, where he had fled from King Solomon, Then Jeroboam returned from Egypt, and they sent and called him. And Jeroboam and all the assembly of Israel came and said to Rehoboam, Your father made our yoke heavy. Now therefore, lighten the hard service of your father and his heavy yoke on us, and we will serve you. So they had a grievance. They went and found Jeroboam and said, Hey, go to the king and ask for this. And basically what they were asking for is exactly, some relief for exactly what Samuel had warned them about, right? It was going to be tough. He was going to extract a lot of things from you to support the king. Rehoboam said to them, verse 5, Go away for 3 days, then come again to me. So the people went away. So he's got something to think about, right? Seems like Rehoboam has a choice, kind of two options here, right? He can either lighten up a little bit. Maybe that means, it kind of affects him. He's got to tighten his belt a little bit, dial back on the budget. Maybe some of the princes have to go get jobs. I don't know. But is he going to lighten up a little bit and keep the people happy? Or is he going to go the other way and just kind of keep things as they were? Doesn't affect him, but they're probably not going to be very happy. Rehoboam was an outside-the-box thinker. Rehoboam found a third path. He surprised everybody perhaps in doing this, but let's skip down to verse 12. So Jeroboam and all the people came to Rehoboam the third day. As the king said, Come to me again the third day. And the king answered the people harshly, and forsaking the counsel that the old men had given him, he spoke to them according to the counsel of the young men, saying, My father made your yoke heavy, but I will add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions. So the king did not listen to the people, for it was a turn of affairs brought about by the Lord, so that he might fulfill his word, which the Lord spoke to Ahijah the Shilonite to Jeroboam the son of Nebat. So we are in an election year this year, obviously. Can you imagine any political candidate getting up and using as their campaign platform, You think the last guy was bad? I'm going to be much worse. Thankfully, our politicians usually save that for when they're actually in office. But Rehoboam got it out there when he kind of used that as his campaign platform. Most of the people, the 10 tribes, said, We don't have anything to do with Rehoboam. They went and followed Jeroboam. That was the establishment of that, the divided kingdom. Jeroboam in the north, the king of Israel. Rehoboam in the south, the king of the tribes of Judah and Benjamin. And I got things out of order here. I wanted to show the map first. This is a map from a time period that was a little bit later than this, but it gives you the idea. There's Judah down here, Israel up here. It is divided, no longer a united kingdom. And it doesn't take very long for us to get into the first mistake, because the very first king, Jeroboam, let's look at him just a little bit. Jeroboam goes, he has a quick rise, right? He is a servant under Solomon. Next thing you know, he is king, and he's got more territory than the other guy. Just as God had foretold, God also promised, if Josh had kept on reading, God promised Jeroboam that if Jeroboam only remained faithful to him, then he would prosper. So it seems pretty simple. And of course, we know that Jeroboam didn't do it, right? 1 Kings chapter 12, this painting here, it's a little harder to see, it gets washed out. This was supposedly a man of God there was a man of God that had come to kind of rebuke Jeroboam for some of the things that he was doing. There's one of the golden calves that he'll set up that we'll read about here just in a second. But why do this? 1 Kings chapter 12, just later in this chapter that we were in, starting in verse 26. So this is after the kingdom has been divided. Jeroboam is established on the throne. Verse 26, Jeroboam said in his heart, Now the kingdom will turn back to the house of David. If this people go up to offer sacrifices in the temple of the Lord at Jerusalem, then the heart of this people will turn again to their Lord, to Rehoboam king of Judah, and they will kill me and return to Rehoboam king of Judah. So the king took counsel and made 2 calves of gold. And he said to the people, You have gone up to Jerusalem long enough. Behold your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. And he set one in Bethel, and the other he put in Dan. So let's go back to the map. Bethel down here, kind of at the southern end. Dan up here at the northern end of that kingdom of Israel. So nobody is too far away. You've got very convenient worship sites for the folks. By Jeroboam's reasoning, and by worldly reasoning, probably made some sense, right? The people If they're going to follow the law of Moses, they had to go offer sacrifices in the temple. And where was the temple? Well, the temple was in Jerusalem. It's across the border. Oops. There we go. Jerusalem is in the kingdom of Judah. So they would have to go to the old home place. Keep in mind, at this time, the temple was still pretty new. It was shiny. There's nothing like it, right? Jeroboam was worried that if the people go back, maybe they start getting homesick. Maybe they see some old friends. Maybe they remember how things were under Solomon. And maybe this new kingdom that he's in charge of doesn't last very long. Maybe he doesn't last very long. And so his solution, let's worship at home. Instead of worshiping God, he sets up golden calves. Jeroboam didn't stop there. Verse 31, in that same chapter, he set up new temples. Verse 32, new feast. Verse 32, it says he even offered sacrifices, which was something the priests were the only ones that were supposed to do. So it was so easy. All right, obey God and you will prosper. But Jeroboam couldn't do it. Jeroboam led him astray. One of the things that's interesting, you read accounts of kings later in the First Kings and Second Kings. A lot of them, when they're introduced as king of Israel, it will say they followed in the sins of Jeroboam. Not a very good endorsement of the guy, right? You are the new standard for falling away from what God wanted you to do, right? So Jeroboam is the new standard, not a good standard, but he is it. What was his problem? He thought he had a better way. Right? He knew presumably what God wanted him to do. God had given him instructions. He thought he could improve on the plan and keep the people from wanting to go back to the old way. Was this an issue? Obviously, but we can look at several verses in the New Testament and see where we see teaching against this. First one I'll look at, Matthew chapter 5 and verse 19. Matthew chapter 5 and verse 19. This is relatively close to the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. In this section, Jesus is talking about how he came to fulfill the old law. Verse 19, therefore, whoever relaxes one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. That's Jeroboam, right? You don't actually have to go to the temple. You don't have to do the sacrifices that were outlined in the law of Moses. You can go up here to the calf. You can take care of it right there. You don't have to leave. He's changed it. Another one, just out of the interest of time, we won't go and read the whole thing, but Acts chapter 15, we studied about this recently in the Wednesday night class, going through Acts, but in Acts chapter 15, it's the story of what is commonly called the Jerusalem Council. But what had happened, some had gone out from the church in Jerusalem or the congregation there in Jerusalem and were teaching that in order to be a Christian, you had to follow some of the things of the law of Moses. They were trying to bind on people things that went beyond what God had told them. So Jesus said, if you relax any of these requirements, it's a problem. Acts chapter 15, if you add to it, it was also a problem. Galatians chapter 1, very clear when Paul writing to the Galatians chapter 1 and verse 6, I'm astonished that you are so quickly deserting him who called you in the grace of Christ, returning to a different gospel. Not that there is another one, but there are some who trouble you and want to distort the gospel of Christ. But even if we or an angel from heaven should preach to you a gospel contrary to the one we preach to you, let him be accursed. As we have said before, now I say again, if anyone is preaching to you a gospel contrary to the one you received, let him be accursed. We can find other passages. That's enough to get the point across. We don't get to add to or take away from what God has revealed to us. We follow his plan, his blueprint. What did Jeroboam do? The temple is fine. Worshiping this way, this is better. People today, singing, that's fine. If we had a band, that would be better. Elders are fine. Bishops and cardinals and popes, that's even better. Sometimes we go the other way. The Bible's fine, but the Bible doesn't really mean what it says about if you have to be baptized. Do we add to? Do we take away from? Jeroboam, that was his. That was his issue. 2 Timothy chapter 3. We'll just look at verse 16 and 17. All scriptures breathed out by God, profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, training in righteousness, that the man of God may be complete, equipped for every good work. The scripture completes us. Right? We don't have to add to it. We don't have to take away. We are in trouble. So that's about it for Jeroboam. I think his issue is pretty obvious, and I don't think anybody here is really seriously talking about trying to rewrite Scripture and follow in his path. But the next two that we're going to look at, in some ways, for me, cut a little bit closer. So let's look now at Jehu, another king of Israel. He came a few kings later. After Jeroboam, there was Nadab. There was a guy named Baasha. There was Elah. There was Zimri, who lasted all 1 week. Omri, Ahab. And under Ahab, we really kind of reached the low point, right? Ahab was just not a good guy. His wife, Jezebel, possibly even worse, really no respect for God, which led to God sending the prophet Elijah to Ahab, 1 Kings chapter 21. If you want to turn there, 1 Kings chapter 21, starting in verse 21. Behold, I will bring disaster upon you. I will utterly burn you up and will cut off from Ahab every male, bond or free in Israel. And I will make your house like the house of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, and like the house of Baasha, the son of Ahijah. Okay, how would he make Ahab's house like their houses? When you went and killed a king, it was customary to not only kill the king, but to kill all of his family. Because after all, you didn't want to have like an heir to the throne still hanging around that somebody could support and maybe take things back from you at some point. So when Jeroboam's son was killed, they killed the rest of the family. When Baasha's descendant, I forget how far his line went down, the rest of his family was wiped out. Elijah's saying the same thing's going to happen to Ahab. They're all going to be gone. For the anger to which you have provoked me, because you have made Israel to sin. And of Jezebel, the Lord also said, the dogs shall eat Jezebel within the walls of Jezreel. Anyone belonging to Ahab who dies in the city, the dogs shall eat. And anyone who dies in the open country, the birds of the heavens shall eat. Now, it would still be a little bit of time before he would go. Ahab was actually killed in battle. His son Ahaziah became king. Then Ahaziah's brother Jehoram. When Jehoram took the throne, it gets confusing. If you remember, if you're in that class in the fall, there was actually a Jehoram on the throne of Judah at the time. Then he died, and another Ahaziah becomes king in Judah. And if I'm doing the math right, that Ahaziah was the nephew of the, let's see, where were we? Jehoram that was king in Israel. So it all got mixed up in there. But anyway, 2 Kings chapter 9. Let's just skip through some of that mess. 2 Kings chapter 9. Elijah is gone by now. Elisha is the main prophet. 2 Kings chapter 9, verse 1. Then Elisha the prophet called one of the sons of the prophets and said to him, tie up your garments, take this flask of oil in your hand, and go to Ramoth Gilead. When you arrive, look there for Jehu, the son of Jehoshaphat, son of Nimshi, and go in and have him rise from among his fellows, lead him to an inner chamber, then take the flask of oil and pour it on his head, and say, thus says the Lord, I anoint you king over Israel. Then open the door and flee. Do not linger. So Jehu, he was like a commander in the army, and he was going to be king. The prophet gave him some additional instructions. He said, basically, go and kill Ahab and all of his. Ahab was already dead. Kill the family of Ahab, wipe them out from the earth. And to his credit, Jehu took to that task with some degree of enthusiasm. Jehu up here, he was one of the things that he's known for was his driving style. He would fit in well, not in Austin, but Atlanta, Miami. I don't know. Yeah, NIV, I like the way it put it. The driving is like that of Jehu, son of Nimshi. He drives like a maniac. Anyway, so the story was Jehoram and Ahaziah, king of Israel, king of Judah, were together in a tower with Mama Jezebel and some others. They were up in Jezreel. The lookout saw somebody furiously riding their chariot that way. They said, it has to be Jehu. Nobody else drives like that. They went down to greet him. 2 Kings chapter 9, verse 21, Joram said, make ready. And they made ready his chariot. Then Joram, king of Israel, and Ahaziah, king of Judah, set out. Each in his chariot went to meet Jehu and met him at the property of Naboth the Jezreelite. When Joram saw Jehu, he said, is it peace, Jehu? Do you come in peace? He answered, what peace can there be so long as the whorings and the sorceries of your mother Jezebel are so many? Then Joram reined about and fled, saying to Ahaziah, treachery, O Ahaziah. And Jehu drew his bow with his full strength and shot Joram between the shoulders, so that the arrow pierced his heart, and he sank in his chariot. While he was at it, Jehu shot the king of Judah. For good measure, only Jezebel was left. She kind of saw what was coming on when the chariot kept coming. She put on some makeup. She fixed up her hair. I'm serious. You can read it in the chapter. She looked out the window and said, "You boys, how you doing? Do you come in peace?" Jehu said to the servants, not to Jezebel, he said to the servants, "You should throw her out the window." They kind of looked at each other, and she expired. They decided that after all, she was the queen, they ought to bury her. The dogs had already eaten her. All that was left, I think, were her hands and her skull or something. Anyway, next, Ahab had 70 sons. Jehu killed all of them. Next on the chop block were the priests of Baal. 2 Kings chapter 10, verse 18. Then Jehu assembled all the people and said to them, "Ahab served Baal a little, but Jehu will serve him much." Wait, that sounds bad. "Now therefore call to me all the prophets of Baal, all his worshippers and all his priests, let none be missing, for I have a great sacrifice to offer to Baal. Whoever is missing shall not live." But Jehu did it with cunning in order to destroy the worshippers of Baal. Basically, he said, "Hey, let's get everybody together in the temple of Baal. We're going to have a big old worship service. Everybody come here. Make sure nobody's missing." So all the followers of Baal were packed in there. Baal, Baal, Baal. Right? And Jehu gets up there to address the crowd. He says, "Nobody in here loves the Lord, do they?" And he, I don't know, they chase a couple of guys out the side door. Jehu, once he gets them, they're getting fired up, they're ready to go. He kind of sneaks out the back. He stops by, says to the captain of the guard, "Kill them all and burn it down." And he does. And so all the prophets of Baal are gone. 1 Kings chapter 10, verse 28. Thus Jehu wiped out Baal from Israel. So we're off to a great start, right? We were studying Jehu in the 5th grade class one time, and Colin was in there. Colin was about to jump up on the table. It's like, "Jehu!" Ah! Verse 29, "But Jehu did not turn aside from the sins of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, which he made Israel to sin, that is, the golden calves that were in Bethel and Dan." So basically, Jehu was very attentive on the way up. Once he was in power, not quite as concerned with what God wanted him to do. For Jehu, service to God was his pathway to power. He had to get rid of Ahab and all his family and all of his supporters if he was going to be king. And if God could help him do that, then all the better. But then what? Two ways to look at it, I think. One was that Jehu was happy to do the will of God as long as that aligned with the will of Jehu. Right? There's plenty of places where Jesus came and said that, he came not to do his will, but his Father's will. John chapter 5 and verse 30. Interest of time, we won't go read that, but you can mark that down. It's not where he basically says that I'm not here of my own, but I'm here to do the will of the Father who sent me. Not that we can't have a will, but if God's will is somehow different, we need to be able to accept that. We need to kind of bend ours to align with what God wants. The other one, Jehu is happy to go and seek the favor of God when he thought he needed him. As soon as he got on the throne, I'm good. Loses a little bit of interest. And this reminded me of a sermon actually that Mark Roberts preached at one point. Mark Roberts, the preacher up in Irving, has been here a couple times. He was doing a meeting in Texarkana and was delivering a sermon on prayer. And one of the things that stuck, this is the only thing I remember from it, but he said one of the things that I remember, and he said, "Hey, do you say a prayer of thanksgiving if you're on a plane and you're about ready to take off?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, I follow. I want the pilots to make it where they're going. I don't want the doors to fall off the plane." And he said, "When you land safely, you say a prayer of thanksgiving." Oh, I don't do as good as that because I'm worried about where's my connecting gate and I got to get my stuff together and we deal with difficulties, and it's a minor difficulty, right? But when we deal with difficulties in our life, a lot of times those bring us close to God. We pray fervently, we seek Him. Do we do nearly as well when things are going good? Do we seek God in good times and in bad? Do we try and bend our will to align with His? If not, I think we're making the same mistakes that Jehu made. And definitely something we can work on there. And from Jehu, it brings us to our last one. It's just coincidence that these were all J kings, but Joash, the last one. And this kind of follows along, right? Joash, well, to get into his story, let's start with Jehoshaphat, king of Judah. Now, he was mostly good, but Ahab kind of pops into the story again here. Jehoshaphat had an alliance with Ahab. He actually married off his son for one of Ahab's daughters. So Jehoshaphat's son Jehoram married a gal named Athaliah, daughter of Ahab. And so when Jehoram became king of Judah, unfortunately he took after his wife, not after his father. When he died, his son Ahaziah took the throne. That was the same Ahaziah that we just read about a little bit with the story of Jehu, right? So we're kind of crossing over a little bit. Jehu killed Ahaziah. So who was next for Judah? Well, Grandma Athaliah actually saw an opportunity. 2 Chronicles chapter 22. 2 Chronicles 22, chapter 10, or 22 is the chapter, verse 10. Now when Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, saw that her son was dead, she arose and destroyed all the royal family of the house of Judah. That's pretty tough, right? Now, kings had more than one wife, and so we don't know for sure whether she was killing some of her own sons, but it says she went and destroyed the royal family of the house of Judah. She was trying to eliminate all the competition, eliminate anybody else who can have a legitimate claim to the throne. That's pretty harsh. Verse 11, but Jehoshabeth, the daughter of the king, took Joash, the son of Ahaziah, and stole him away from among the king's sons who were about to be put to death. So it kind of implies that Athaliah was about to kill her own grandson, right? But one of his aunts hid him. She put him and his nurse in a bedroom. Thus Jehoshabeth, the daughter of King Jehoram and wife of Jehoiada the priest, because she was a sister of Ahaziah, hid him from Athaliah, so that she did not put him to death. And he remained with them 6 years, hidden in the house of God, while Athaliah reigned over the land. So she's married to the priest. They take the boy, hide him in the temple, kind of raise him, and then when he was 7 years old, I guess it was time. Right? Nobody cared too much for Athaliah. Evidently, when Joash was 7, he was installed as king. Jehoiada the priest was his chief counselor. As long as he was there, Joash did well. He tore down altars of Baal, restored the temple. All seemed to be going well. There's a whole lot of promise. And then Jehoiada died. 2 Chronicles chapter 24, verse 17. Now after the death of Jehoiada, the princes of Judah came and paid homage to the king. Then the king listened to them, and they abandoned the house of the Lord, the God of their fathers, and served the Asherim and the idols. And wrath came upon Judah and Jerusalem for this guilt of theirs. Yet he sent prophets among them to bring them back to the Lord. These testified against them, but they would not pay attention. So it seems like the idols, the false worship, is never very far away from these folks. And so, Joash, as soon as his mentor dies, he's headed down the wrong path. The son of Jehoiada, Zechariah, who was a priest, actually came to Joash and tried to talk some sense into him. And keep in mind, Jehoiada essentially raised Joash. So this wasn't exactly like his brother, but raised in the same household. It probably seems like that. Came to Joash to try to talk some sense into him. Joash had him killed. Joash was killed soon after. Apparently was not very missed. Jehoiada was actually shown more honor in his death. Well, what went wrong? Jehoiada died, obviously. But at some point, doesn't Joash have to stand up on his own 2 feet? Evidently, whatever faith Jehoiada had and tried to teach to Joash, whatever faith he had that made him risk his life to hide the boy until it was time, never really Joash's faith went away so quickly. Right? Reminds me of the parable of the sower. It's a little bit, the seed that falls on the rocky soil, and then as soon as things get tough, it kind of withers and dies away. Can this kind of stuff happen today? Oh, you better believe it. Right? The classic case would be when kids leave home, they're not under the guidance of their parents anymore. What happens to them? But it's not just them. Sometimes it's older, later in life, a spouse dies. What happens to the remaining spouse? Or mother and father die, and then adult kids, where all of a sudden you don't see them anymore. What happens? Haven't made it. They really haven't made that faith their own. Parents have a responsibility, to teach and mentor and bring kids up. But I'm about convinced that just as important as to live as a good example, Kids are smart, right? If you're hypocritical, if your life isn't matching your words, you're not actually putting these things you say into action, they see it. They're the first ones to see it, and it's not going to end well. Kids have responsibility too. We got to work at it. We know the scriptures, where we need to know the scriptures. We need to question them. It's okay to ask questions. It's okay to test things, because that's how you come to your own conclusions. Mom, dad, grandparents can't believe it for you. Okay to ask questions. Okay to ask for help to sort it out. Not okay just to try to get faith by osmosis. Not okay just to put it aside as soon as something else comes along. You got to seek and seek it out. Not be like Joash, who seemingly just throws it all away the first time somebody comes to him with some flattering words. He's not seeking the truth. He's just kind of like, I'm tired of this. We're going to go do something else. So, lessons. People are people, right? Jeroboam teaches us the lesson that we're not smarter than God. We can't improve on His plan, but we need to, we need to find out what that is and stick to that. Jehu reminds us that we shouldn't be serving God strictly for our own benefit. We shouldn't be serving God only when we think we need Him and leaving Him behind when we think times are good. Is there really any time we don't need God? And Joash says we need to make the faith our own. And that's something we can all work on at all points. The apostles came to Jesus at one point and said, increase our faith. They're asking Him to help them do essentially the same thing that Joash was missing. So, I wish we had more time. We could go into more of these kings. Every one of them had lessons like this that we can learn. If you weren't in that class last fall, I would encourage you, spend some time going back and reading some of these things. There's some sections in there we don't read often, but there's other than just good stories. How can you beat Jehu, right? He was like the action hero for a little while. But they're good stories, but good lessons in there as well. I don't know, we haven't kind of built up to the, kind of the traditional invitation, but that always, we always offer that opportunity. If you need this time now to come and ask for prayers for support of the group here, if you need, if you need to be baptized for forgiveness of sins, to begin your walk with Jesus, and to improve on what some of these kings of the old kingdom did, then won't you do that now as Earl comes and leads us in our invitation song.